Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last episode of Season 6, the last episode of 2020. This is episode 424. And I don't know if it has a title. I just invited Jenny to come on and chit-chat with me, and we just talked for a while. It was nice. 2020 actually began with an interview with Jenny, and I thought it would be nice if we ended with one as well. You know, if you want to know how prolific 2020 has been for the podcast, that episode with Jenny that went up on January 2nd, 2020, that was episode 293. And this is episode 424. It's pretty crazy, huh? This year is going to end with almost 1.5 million downloads. That's just in 2020. So the podcast is taking off, and it's all because of you and how much you share and how much you listen, and I appreciate that. Give me just 1 second to shout out the sponsors. Although this episode is not sponsored, I have fulfilled all of my sponsorships for 2020, but I still want to thank Dexcom, Omnipod, the Contour Next One blood glucose meter, Gvoke HypoPen, and Touched by Type 1. And I don't want to forget to mention the T1D exchange. Support from the sponsors is why the podcast is able to exist. It's why it's free. It's why it's plentiful. And I think it's why it's good. Sometimes I get emails from people and they're like, can you please tell the host? And I laugh because I am the, what do they call me? I do it all. This podcast is just me. Editing, scheduling, recording, technical stuff, making backups of the show. It's all a one-man show. And it's supported by the ads and the advertisers. So thank you very much to all of the great advertisers of the Juicebox Podcast. And a special thanks to all of you who have clicked on the links and checked them out. Dexcom.com/Juicebox. Learn more about that Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. Don't forget, if you're getting your insurance through the United States Veterans Administration, the VA, go check it out. You might be really happy with the coverage you find. The Contour Next One blood glucose meter is my favorite blood glucose meter ever. It's the best one Arden's ever used. It's the most accurate. It's the easiest to use. And you can find out more about it at contournext.com/Juicebox. And of course, my daughter's been using an Omnipod tubeless insulin pump since she was 4. She is in the other room right now, 16 years old, and still using Omnipod because it is absolutely terrific. Omnipod will send you a free, no obligation demo, and all you have to do is go to myomnipod.com/Juicebox to request it. Touched by Type 1 is a fantastic organization doing great things for people living with type 1 diabetes. They're a sponsor of the show, and you can find out more about them at touchedbytype1.org. And of course, Gvoke HypoPen. It's the glucagon my daughter carries, and you can learn more about it at gvokeglucagon.com/Juicebox. And if you'd like to take just a few minutes to add meaningful data to great work that's being done for people with type 1 diabetes, go to t1dexchange.org/Juicebox. You can help support type 1 diabetes research, and it's super easy to do right there from your home. There's nothing else. You don't have to go to a doctor. You can actually be part of something. t1dexchange.org/Juicebox. Links in the show notes, links at juiceboxpodcast.com, etc., etc., etc. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting the show. Here's my conversation with Jenny. I thought it might be nice if we just had a relaxed conversation. Not about anything specific.
Not about anything fun?
Yeah. Okay. Well, no. We don't have to do any like hardcore diabetes stuff today. So like I said, I'm recording. So like I said to you when we spoke about recording today, the very first episode of the season, of season 6, was with you. and we basically had like almost interviewed you a little bit, right? And this is going to be the last episode of 2021, so I thought it would be nice to do the same thing. See?
Yay.
Yeah, right.
I agree.
Well,
it is.
We just have to chill out and relax and do something good. Plus, you don't get to hear about, the people who are asking about you all the time, so.
No.
Yeah. So I get the notes and it's always like, thank you. And at the end, it's like, don't thank Jenny too, or on the Facebook page where people, I saw someone yesterday say, I went to Integrated Diabetes to work with Jenny. She wasn't available, so they put me somewhere else. And I said, I think I answered back and I said, that might be my fault that Jenny doesn't have any room on her calendar. So I told somebody recently how, when you're telling me about emails you get from the podcast, people are like, oh, your people. And I was like, yeah, they're just the people listening to the podcast. They're as much your people as they are my people.
Right.
I don't know. I just wondered, 2021, it needed to be wrapped up somehow. So how was your year?
My year was, all around, it was a fine year. It really was. Nothing major. Thankfully, in our family, we didn't have any, disruptions and any weirdness. But it is what it is, and we made it through. And hopefully, next year is better in other ways. Like I think this year, like everybody, sort of missed travel and that kind of stuff, the conferences and things that I was supposed to speak at. And a couple of them, usually I bring my husband and my guys along with me, and they kind of go and explore the city while I'm stuck inside a freezing cold conference center.
Yeah.
So we didn't do that this year, but, hopefully next year that'll be back on the agenda maybe. And so
I missed my speak. Yeah, I missed the stuff I was supposed to speak at. I wish I could have. It would have been nice. My family never offers to come with me. That's one. They're just like, goodbye. I think they're trying to get away from me. And they're like, oh, we don't even have to run away. He's going to leave. This is perfect. But I did miss like that conversation, meeting people who found the podcast and came out to say hello, or watching the faces of people in the audience as you say something and it clicks in their head and you can see them think like, oh, why did I never think of that? At this moment, I'm not 100% sure if you stood me up in front of people, if I'd remember any of the things that I used to say. Like, I might have to go back and study up a little bit about it. Yeah, I'm not certain.
In fact, I think the travel, I don't know if it was the last travel you had too, but was literally like March 1st.
Oh, no,
I came home from Atlanta was when we were at the JDRF thing in Atlanta together. And that was the last literal travel that I did.
Well, the first thing you and I ever did together was the last thing I've ever done. So
yeah. That's weird.
It was really strange. I feel like I felt like back then there was this talk of like people are getting this thing and they're calling it coronavirus, and it seems like it's getting serious. Like that was the vibe around it. But I'm just going to go to Georgia because it's probably nothing, and then by the time I got home, it was just like, get in your homes. Alarms going off and
close the doors. Don't go anywhere.
Running through the street with pitchforks and, lanterns. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. I just made it back.
Right. Well, I can remember being at the Atlanta airport, flying home actually is more like where I remember seeing a lot of people already like wearing masks in the airport. And my silly brain was just like, we know something is going on, right? And I wasn't like I always wash my hands. I'm always very cognizant of what I touch when I'm in a very public place like that, or even on airplanes, kind of like wiping things down. But like the people with the masks on in the airport, I was sort of like, maybe I should be a little more careful, maybe not. And then of course, like 2 weeks later, everything got closed. Yeah. So yeah.
Suddenly you're running around going, I need a mask. Where's it?
Right.
No. And that was a great event. They did a really nice job with that one. Kim ran that, I think.
They did a wonderful, wonderful job. In fact, I met several people actually who came there specifically for your presentation, which was awesome. Had literally driven from like other states to be able to come, and then called to do some work with me.
Nice.
So it was kind of nice because I'd actually gotten to meet them in person at that conference. And now I've gotten to know them, and they're lovely people. And it's so nice.
I just interviewed the husband of one of the adults living with type 1 diabetes that we met there. And I think it just went up a little while ago.
Awesome.
It was really interesting too, I thought. So let me say something nice about you.
Aww.
So aside of your knowledge of diabetes and how you think about it, which I think jives very closely with how I think about it, you're really good at being on the podcast. You probably don't even realize that, but you're very comfortable to talk to. You wait and jump in at the right times. I don't think we ever talk over each other while we're talking. Nothing's planned, which makes it even more kind of crazy that it works. But when we got to Georgia, we did I think you did a room while I was doing a room, and then you came into my room, and then we did one together.
Yep.
Didn't practice it. I didn't tell you what we were going to talk about. I just grabbed the microphone. I started talking, and when it felt comfortable, I threw it to you. And when it felt comfortable, you threw it back to me. And I really thought it worked amazingly well. You were like the best partner for talking about diabetes with. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And I think actually we had literally only talked in person 5 minutes prior to me coming in on kind of the second half of your whole presentation and talk and everything.
Yep.
So yeah, you had come in before I was doing sort of a breakout in another room about, I can't remember what the topic was. But yeah, it was kind of fun because then I just got to chat with you on stage with everybody.
We basically just met there, and then it gets crazy again and you can't find each other. I was like, well, I'll have lunch with Jenny. And then when it happened, I couldn't find you.
Yeah.
And that was, I think we said goodbye maybe. And then we were back recording again a couple weeks later. But no, it's just, you have no idea, because there are people I have on throughout the years. And I think this person's very knowledgeable about this, and there's more to say about it, but it was just too hard to talk to them. Not that they did anything wrong. It just, there was no comfortable back and forth. It didn't work right. And I end up not doing it again with them. So I just think I'm lucky, and everyone listening is lucky, because you're just very good at this. And have you ever done anything like this prior to being on this podcast? No?
Not ever. Yeah. I mean, my other are much more professional, prepare it ahead of time, put the PowerPoint kind of thing together. I think the closest to this would be, I've done some webinars for some type 1 adult groups, kind of more on the West Coast. That I've done sort of in an evening kind of program for them. But again, it's more of a pick a topic, put some information together, and then have some discussion with the people who were joining in to learn.
Right.
But it's never been this. I know I never think of, I always think that this is a little bit of a break from my workday whenever I get to talk and do this with you. It's very enjoyable. I love it.
I completely
thank
agree.
You.
No, I 100% agree. I always come in the room smiling and leave the room smiling. And then I say your name a couple of times during the day. And my wife's like, did you have a good time with Jenny today? I was like, we did. And then I start talking about it. And I realize she's making fun of me. And then I stop. So
that's funny.
Yeah. It just is it's a stroke of luck, because honestly, the podcast does really well, but it does better because of you. There's just no doubt about it. I could get on the microphone and talk through those ideas, but it just wouldn't have the same feeling. And I think it wouldn't be as engaging. I think it might taste like medicine a little bit when people are listening. There's something about our conversation that makes it, easy for people to pick up. And because of that, and I'm sure you do too, but I'm up to about 10 to a dozen notes a day about people's lives getting better. And that's just a really big deal. I used to write about this stuff on my blog, and I would get I'd get a letter once a month, a couple times a month. Hey, this is really helping me. But the podcast it's at a different frequency. And I really think it's got a lot to do with the fact that I found you. So, and I'm glad that you think of it as a break. That's really nice. You're talking about diabetes all day.
I do. I think of it. It's kind of whenever I see it on my calendar for the week, I'm like, oh yeah, I get to talk to Scott this week.
Well, that is really lovely.
It's always fun to have a conversation, even as in depth in some of the topics as we get.
Mm-hmm.
I think the nice thing is that there's a comfort level from both sides, from your side and my side, in terms of the discussion point. And again, like, I usually don't know what you're going to bring up for the day, which is even, I think, nicer to keep it more conversational.
Right.
But we have a very easy like back and flow of information.
Mm-hmm.
And the big thing is I never really feel like I'm like educating you, which I guess is the reason that I like the conversations, because even though you ask some questions for me to elaborate on,
right.
And I know that it's helping so many other people when they're listening, it's also nice to have your sort of background and whatnot along with it.
Well, so, see, that's I feel like you just referred to me like as almost a peer, and that's way too kind, but I very much appreciate it. I have to say that some of the nicest things around this diabetes stuff that's been said to me over the years is by you. When you once told me, if you once said, if you had a degree, you could do this, as like you could do my job. I was really touched by that. And very similarly, when you said that my tug of war description for pre-bolusing was like the best way you had ever heard it explained.
It is.
Oh, no, that really makes me uncomfortable, even now that you just said it again.
Aww.
But but that meant a lot to me, because I don't know. I don't know why it's surprising to me, other than to say that if you could get into a time machine and go back 30 years and find 19-year-old Scott, and you could really get to know him, and then I pulled you aside and said, that kid one day will be the person that people listen to about this, you'd go, no, that can't be right. I just met the guy, and I think you've got the wrong person. There's no way. It to this day shocks me that I'm the person who runs this podcast. Like,
really?
It doesn't. Yeah, I don't. It's weird that it's me, and I don't. I recognize that what I'm good at, and I'm not shocked on that level. Like, it's not false modesty. It's not like It's not like, oh, I don't really know that stuff, you shouldn't say that. It's not that. I don't feel like an imposter. It's just, if you could have seen the trajectory of my life, it wasn't. I don't know how it ended up being me, other than Arden got diabetes. So yeah, it's very.
I think life experiences shift people often. And whether people choose to keep moving along with that shift or not, sort of is the difference, I think. I mean, when I was diagnosed with diabetes, I wanted to be a veterinarian. I had wanted to be a veterinarian since I was like a very small child.
Right.
I mean, Grandpa had a farm. I loved like all the animals. I always asked big questions. We had cats when I was growing up. I always wanted to go to the veterinary office whenever we did, ask lots of questions. And then when I was diagnosed, I had really good educators, thankfully. And in high school, then just sort of like shifted. I realized I was really good at science. And I really also started, my mom is an amazing cook. She's awesome. And I kind of realized that because food was such a big part of diabetes management, that maybe I should kind of switch gears and sort of go the route of, I didn't want to be a nurse. I don't do some of nursing things very well. You can bleed all over me, but like the whole like mucus angle, blah, I just can't do that thing. So I was like, I like nutrition anyway, so let's be a dietitian. And then I knew that I didn't want to do that. Like, I don't want to teach people about low cholesterol diets. That's just not for me.
Right.
But diabetes was the thing. Yeah. So again, I kind of think, I don't know, who knows, maybe if something else had happened in your life with kids, maybe you would have had a very different angle, but this was the course that you were supposed to have. And you've done an amazing thing for so many people starting this. You have. I just feel like,
thank you. I just feel like I saw its value, and so I leaned into it. But I mean, there's a part of me, I won't lie to you, there was a part of me at one point that thought, this is what I'm going to do. Like, I'm going to write about and talk about diabetes in my free time. Like, I don't even have diabetes. Have you been watching my blood sugars online? I definitely don't.
No, I haven't actually. I should. You told me about it.
I definitely don't have diabetes. So,
good.
Yeah. Actually, I haven't, isn't it funny the irony of what I'm doing? I haven't even taken the time to like celebrate that I don't have it. There's a couple times I'm like, oh, this isn't not very exciting for the people watching. Instead of just thinking, this is great. I can walk past a candy dish, pull like 3 candies out that total like 30 carbs. It's just pure sugar, and eat them, and my blood sugar doesn't move. And I haven't even had time to be like, yay, that's exciting. But to what I was saying, there was a moment where I was like, this is what I'm going to do, because my trajectory was, I wanted to be a screenwriter. Like, I wanted to write movies. That's how that's what I thought about when I was growing up. And then I was in a poor family. I didn't get to go to college. I had to go right to work, and I just had terrible jobs. I mean, like, I worked in sheet metal shops and paint rooms and just terrible things. And the entire time I was there, I would just feel like, I'm not supposed to be here. Mm-hmm. Like, this isn't I love the guys I worked with, and that whole part of it was terrific. But I just kept thinking, like, I have these things in my head. I should, but I'd get home, I'd be so tired, it wouldn't matter. And I was still broke, and just kept going over and over again like that. And one day I just thought, I've got to get out of this. Like, I can't keep doing this forever. And a friend of mine was collecting debts. And she's like, you can talk. You could do this job easily. So then the next thing I knew, I went from like a sheet metal shop to sitting in a cubicle with a screen in front of me, and somebody's information would pop up. You'd have 10 seconds to familiarize yourself with this data on the screen. And trust me, it didn't look like computers look now. It was,
I'm sure
it wasn't easy. And then you'd hear a voice, and they'd be like, hello. And they were there. Hi, Jenny. My name's Scott. I'm calling from, I forget what it was, something bank. You're 28 days late on your payment. You're in jeopardy of going to 60 days late. We really need you to make a payment right now. I was dunning people. And
wow, I didn't know that.
I was so good at it, I quit the job because it made me feel bad how good I was at it. Like, it was a job you didn't want to be good at.
Right.
And so I used that experience to move to a credit union doing the same thing. And then the minute I could get out of it, I became their graphic designer, which I had no background in whatsoever. It was it was a little tiny credit union, and the job came up, and I went to the human resources person. I said, I can do that. Like, I've seen the things that you guys produce here. I can make them all. And they just, what would it hurt them? Like, I wasn't making very much money. So they took a flyer, and I did well at it, and did it for a number of years until Kelly got pregnant with Cole. And then I quit my job, and I'd been a stay-at-home dad I quit my job at the end of 1999.
Wow.
Yeah, I haven't had a real job since then. And, but I would write things. I would try to write things. I never had enough time. Like, I was always exhausted. And then Arden got diagnosed, and I didn't know what to do. So I wrote a blog about diabetes, and, I didn't want her to struggle at some point. And I really felt like she was going to, and I wasn't understanding it. And I don't have the kind of brain, this is going to sound strange maybe, I couldn't figure it out. Like, I couldn't step back and look at it and figure it out. I had to like live through it and then go back and write about it. And then like little lights would get turned on as I was going. That's why some people are, I see some people online, they're like, I'm not getting this quickly enough. They're very upset with themselves. And I'm like, your kids had diabetes for 6 months. Like, at 2 years, I was still crying in the shower. You're only 6 months in, and your kid's A1C 7, and I can see it coming down consistently. Like, 3 months from now, you have this.
Right.
It took me a lot longer to figure it out. And it really wasn't until I wrote something on the blog one day when it really just hit me. I was like, there's a system here. I didn't even realize it at first. And I didn't even know what it was. I just knew it was there. So I picked through everything that I wrote, and I was like, that and that plus that and that equals a good outcome. And, and then I picked those pieces and I refined them down.
It's kind of like data analysis, really, but you just did it in a different way.
Yeah, trust me, because I can't analyze data. And so I kept distilling them down, but I understood them already. I was distilling them down so I could write about them.
Right.
Because I have a real belief about communication, and I don't think that people like to be talked at, and I don't think people like things that sound like medicine, especially when they're already, upset. And so I just kept going, and I just kept telling myself, like, if you can make these ideas t-shirt slogans, then people will be able to remember them. Mm-hmm. And that was it. And then I guess it's just lucky that I wrote that book, because I got to write a book called Life is Short, Laundry is Eternal. And it was about being a stay-at-home dad. That got me, I can remember the exact day that I decided to make a website for myself, like scottbenner.com, which is, don't go look at it. I haven't looked at it in like 10 years. But because I made that around the book, Katie Couric's producer found me looking for fathers around Father's Day.
Wow.
Right. And so the next thing I knew, I was on a soundstage in New York doing this interview with Katie Couric. And when it was over, she grabbed me and she was like, "You're so good at this." And I was like, "What is it I'm good at?" Like, because I didn't even know. I didn't know what she was talking about. She's like, "You're just so entertaining and you speak so freely. This was wonderful." I was like, "Thank you." And then I left. And like 2 weeks later, a different producer called me and she said, "I'm Katie Couric's producer." And I was like, "No, you're not. I already spoke to Katie Couric's producer and she's a different person." She goes, "No, that's her web producer. I'm her television producer." And I was like, "Okay." And she goes, "And we have a slot in a couple of days. We're having some single dads or some stay-at-home dads come on and we'd like you to come." And I was like, "Yeah, I'll do that." So the next thing I know,
awesome.
It was so cool. But I got there and she looked at me and smiled like she knew me, like recognized me, which was nice. And I sat down. And Jenny, if one of these things is not like the other ever existed, it was me, right? Like I was like much older than these other guys. These guys were all like very kind of like metrosexual guys from like New York and stuff like that, right? Who are just like, taking care of their kids. And I'm just answering the questions as they come along. And then this one guy starts talking about this whole experience is making my wife and I closer. And it was so pie in the sky and like happy. And it wasn't my turn to talk, but I leaned down, I looked down the line and I was like, "Hey," I interrupted him. And I was like, "How long have you been married?" And he goes, "Oh, we've been married like a year." And I laughed. And then I could see on the monitor, the camera swung over to me and I was like, "You don't have any idea what you're talking about. You're not even married yet." Like I said, right. You come back 15 years from now and tell me that story. And then I'll tell you, you're doing a great job. And then I said something else.
How old were your kids at this point?
It was 8 years ago. So Cole was like,
oh, so it was they were old enough, well old enough that you had been married and had life with kids and whole story.
I had already been yelled at a couple of thousand times. I knew what it was like to be married. Yeah. And so, and I don't remember what I said next, but whatever I said next made 500 people who were in the studio audience laugh at the same time. And I have to tell you that is a feeling that is difficult to duplicate, because now you feel like a puppet master. You're like, I wonder if I can make them do this, and what if I could try and
right.
You know what I mean? And then Katie pulled me aside again afterwards and said, "Wow, that was terrific." She's like, "You were this whole thing." And I said, "Thank you." And she's like, this was going nowhere and you absolutely saved it. And it was just such a nice moment. And then
that's awesome.
And that made me think about making a podcast. So that's it. And I never would have leapt from the diabetes blog to a diabetes podcast. It didn't occur to me to do that. So
sure,
it was her. So if you're all happy with your A1Cs, thank Katie Couric.
Well, the big thing too is like, and maybe this is just sort of like reading into, but like the feeling you got when the people laughed and you knew it was an honest laugh. Like it wasn't a generated audience, please laugh kind of sign up above. Like they thought it was hilarious.
I made them laugh. Yeah.
And you kind of took that, even if it was on like a subconscious level, and said, if I can make people laugh, why can't I take what I know and like give that to more people to just be able to feel like they can do better too. Yeah. Like, I don't want to be the only one doing a good job at this. And I mean, that's kind of myself too. Every time somebody sends me a message that, I got my A1C down and now my doctor has given me a go ahead to get pregnant, or, my child's endo team is astounded at what we're doing together, and they're amazed at his A1C being here, and they're usually happy if it's just at 7.5. I mean, the notes and things, that's my like audience happy laughing to me. Like,
I understand.
That's why I like doing what I do. Yeah. So
I appreciate that. And I feel the exact same way. When the first person told me that their doctor told me to listen to the podcast, I was like, ooh, I'm on to something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that same kind of interaction where the audience laughed is, I don't know how to say, this is funny. I'm not trying to insult anybody, because I'm definitely not, I don't have those feelings, but I know how your blood sugar can be stable and steady, right? And I see it as my job to get it across to people any way I can. And I know that the picture you paint for one person that makes them go, oh, okay, this is it, isn't the one that works for someone else, right?
Right.
And so while I think most people make podcasts thinking, well, I am tangentially related to this subject and I'll have conversations with people about it and it'll be interesting, and those people are always wrong, or not always wrong, but podcasts are interesting. There are a lot of podcasts. I believe that at the moment there are 1.5 million of them. Of those 1.5 million, I forget what it is, maybe only 500,000 put up an episode a month. Of that, only 50% of them get like 140 downloads per episode. So the truth is, it's easy to have a podcast, like it used to be easy to have a blog. The large majority of them are either aren't being produced regularly, or no one's really listening to them to begin with.
Sure.
Like, for perspective, while you and I are recording this, I should have a couple of hundred new downloads by the time I put this down again. This podcast gets a lot of downloads. So there's this very finite amount of podcasts that anybody's actually listening to. And I realize that not everybody hears the tug of war story and then goes, oh, pre-bolusing, I got it. And you also have to realize that not everybody's hearing every episode. So my job's not just to do it once. It's to do it over and over and over again in a way that hopefully doesn't take the people who found the show 5 years ago and bore them. Like, I want them to stay for the community aspect. And because in truth, if they stay, then the podcast gets more downloads. If the podcast gets more downloads, then it's easier to sell ads. And if it's easier to sell ads, then I get to keep making the podcast, right? Like, this thing kind of like all ties itself together. But I am working the strings of the puppets a little bit. Like, I do say things to trick the people listening into understanding diabetes. That's not the intention, but it is. But what's happening.
It's a positive trick.
Yes, it's a very positive.
It's a positive reasoning trick. There's not like anything, malicious
There's
about it.
There's nothing devious about it, right? No, what I've basically done is I've taken my superpower and I've turned it to good. Like, really, I don't know if you've ever seen The Boys on Amazon. Some of these guys get superpowers and then they just do terrible things with it. Not me. I've decided to do something good with it. So it makes me think of the last day of 9th grade. I have very few memories of school, but I'm going down the hallway and my guidance counselor comes out of his office and grabs me. And it's just such an impactful moment that I remember his name, and I remember no one's name. And I'm sure he's got to be long past, but his name was Mr. Wiley. And he pulled me into a little nook, which today I think would be assault. And and he goes, what are you going to do in high school? And I was like, what? He goes, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'm like, in my brain, I'm like, well, now we're talking about this? I'm like, we're out of here in 3 hours. I'm never coming back to this building. And I said, I don't really know. And he said, you should be an attorney. That's what I think. And I said, why? And he goes, you're just very good at talking to people. You should be an attorney. And I remember feeling very filled with, like, I came from a divorced family. Nobody ever told me nice things about myself. There was no time for that. And I felt good that he thought I could be an attorney. And then I said, I couldn't do that. And he said, why? I said, well, then I'd be an attorney. And he laughed because I think he thought I was casting aspersions at the law profession. But what I really meant was, then I'd be an attorney every day for the rest of my life. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to do anything every day for the rest of my life. I feel like there's a lot of things I could do. And he laughed, I laughed. We were like, hey. And then I walked out. I remember it because it was a positive impact, because an adult said something to me as a child that was positive. But then I did exactly the opposite of his. I didn't lean into my education at all. I looked at high school as something I had to get through, which was a huge mistake. But I just negotiated my way through that. I got to high school, they put us in this auditorium and said there was a technical school that was a few miles away where you could learn to weld or, do all this stuff. And there was a field trip you could go look around. And I was like, that sounds like for losers. That's how right? And then they said, and the way the schedule runs is 2 weeks a month you go to tech school full-time, and 2 weeks a month you go to high school full-time. And I thought, so I only have to go to high school for a year and a half? If I go to tech school, put me on that bus. So I went through every room, small engine repair, making the food for the cafeteria. There was hairdressing school. And I was like, I don't want to do any of this, right?
That might have come in handy this past several months.
You should see my hair right now, by the way, if I could cut my own hair. So I made the decision to go to baking school, because that had the most pretty girls in it.
Of course, that's why you went.
I was like, hey, listen, if I have to come to avoid a year and a half of high school, I'm going to come. I'm doing this. My parents were like, whatever. Nobody cared. And I just picked the room with the most pretty girls. And now I can bake like you wouldn't believe.
Well, I'm glad you learned something out of it besides just looking at pretty girls.
Yes. Where you can make a cinnamon bun 6 at a time, I can make 600 of them at a time. So that's the kind of baking I learned to do. But I got out of that. I got a job in a bakery. You had to start at 1:30 in the morning. I did it for a week and I quit. I was like, I'm not doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. I was so happy during my dietetic internship. The food service aspect of it. I mean, I knew that I was never going into food service.
Mm-hmm.
I never wanted to do that, but we had to do that type of a rotation. And I too had to be in the bakery of the hospital system food service area. I think it was like 2:30 in the morning. And I was like,
oh, I couldn't do it.
I'm so glad this 4 weeks is done. Bye-bye. I will not be in food service.
I texted my brother last night around 6 o'clock to wish him a happy birthday. And he was just waking up and getting ready to go to work because he works a shift and shift work. And I'm like, oh God, how does he do that? But yeah, there was nothing. And I just jumped. My uncle gave me a job. I did that for a while. I did everything else that I told you about. There's a bunch of others. I worked in a 7-Eleven for a year. That was it. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I cut lawns for people. And it's Kelly really who deserves a lot of credit for seeing who I was through what my life made me look like I was.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I didn't if you looked at what I did and how I did it, I appeared one way, but she actually listened to me and, kind of heard my thoughts. And I just got randomly lucky. I really belong in a trailer somewhere. No, I do really.
No,
please.
You really don't.
Left to my own devices, I'm somewhere with a bog, like Shrek, basically, is what I'm saying. I think that's about all I would have accomplished on my own. Kelly was the one who I think saw my potential, and not that she was trying to coax it out of me, but she didn't judge me for the other stuff. That I was working in the 7-Eleven, which there's nothing wrong with. It was a perfectly fine job. And I did it. I worked hard at it, but, it's not a career, obviously. And it just was a way to pass time and make some money to pay bills. And one day I just realized, I'm like, all you're doing is living to pay this bill, to live to pay the bill. This, you have to do something. but a lot of just lucky. Like I said, like, how did I talk a human resources person into letting the credit card collector do the, and so if all of this tells you one thing, it's that it's talking is what I'm really good at. Mm-hmm. So I talk my way into things and out of things.
I think you've sort of finessed your talking though to a point of really being able to teach. And there's a difference because I mean, there are a lot of professionals who have gone to college and spent thousands of dollars to do what they do and still do not talk well. They just, and I feel bad saying it, but it's the truth. I mean, and thus is, I think, a lot of the reason, and I certainly wouldn't down any of the diabetes professionals that are out there. But when you're when you're managing a condition like diabetes, talking sometimes needs to go beyond like the basic hit points on a list to address. And you have to get to a very personal level of talk in order to meet the need. And everyone's needs are different.
Right.
So,
well, yeah, that's basically what answered the question to me when people, like when I talk to somebody privately and that doesn't have diabetes, like they're like, wait, so someone listens to your podcast to learn about diabetes instead of talking to their doctor? And I was like, the doctors are generally speaking not great at explaining it to them. Yeah. And, it's hard for like a lay person who doesn't have type 1 to even understand how that would be, because most people's experience with doctors is one of the problems with going to a doctor is that people think you go in there and you sit quietly and they tell you something and then you leave with the answer. Right. And it just doesn't work that way, especially with type 1. But still, even talking, like if I'm not lying to you, if I tell you that 30 seconds before you popped up, I was thinking maybe we should talk about do some defining diabetes stuff. And then when I saw you, I was like, no, let's just talk, do an end of year wrap up. So nothing that I've said while we were talking have I ever considered before I said it. And I speak pretty quickly so that I make sense while I'm talking. That's where I think, I think everyone's good at something, but I'm proud of myself. Like I can't believe I'm this good at speaking in a coherent way that leads to something. I'm not just filling time. You should
be proud of what you've put out there. I mean, it's been beneficial enough, especially in terms of what you've seen in the listeners that you have and the growth and who it's reaching, that more and more and more people keep like, hey, you should listen to the Juicebox. Hey, you should listen to the Juicebox. And that outreach is beyond. I mean, I don't know how many other places I know online that I could send people to listen to or do a little bit more reading or whatnot. But many of them I don't. I mean, there are lots of them.
Yeah.
And I don't direct people to very many other sites. I just don't, because when you want somebody to really learn and to continue to learn, especially in the past 5 years with all the changes that have come with diabetes management, you have to continue to evolve and move along with that in your discussion. And you also have to be willing to say, hey, a couple of years ago, I remember we talked about such and such. And with today's technology, we don't need to do that anymore.
Right.
Or we don't need to do it as much, or it's changed now. So you need to continue to sort of move people into learning that things aren't just going to stay where they are.
Well, I think where most people get stuck, and this is where the listeners deserve a lot of the credit, is those people get so stuck trying to drive traffic that they take they hear people talking about online and they turn it into content. And I don't think of it that way. I don't look to the people who need the answers for the ideas about what to say. And I think those other blogs and probably some of the, I don't know, I've never listened to another type 1 podcast, but I can tell you that I can see some metrics online. And as far as type 1 diabetes podcasts go, there's this one, and then the rest don't come anywhere near this one in terms of listenership.
Right.
And I don't mean them. I think it's terrific. Like, I really think it's terrific that people do what they do. And if they're helping people, I think that's terrific. But if they'd see more growth if they were giving people something that made a listener like get off and think, I have to tell somebody about this.
Right.
You know, I listen to podcasts, and some of them I enjoy, but I would never tell anyone else to listen to. And there are some that every time I'm with somebody, I'm like, have you heard this conversation on this thing? Like it drives you to want to talk to somebody. I just think that while, you know, Jenny and I talked maybe a week ago and we set a schedule. So like she's on the schedule throughout 2021. And I told her what I wanted to do in 2021. And then I was like, hey, in 2022, I also think we should start moving in this direction a little bit. And that's what she's talking about. Like, I know where diabetes is going and I need to understand it so that when it's happening to you listening in real time, I'm already, you know, I can articulate it in a way that'll help you do it.
Right.
I just see it that way. Like I've never worried about the clicks. I always think about anything that I've ever produced and put online. If it's good, people will listen to it. If it's great, people will tell people about it. But you can't force people to tell people about things.
No.
Like with sharing, like, please share, please click, please. I'm like, just, if it's good, it's good. If it's not, stop wasting people's time. And I think the diabetes space, where it fails over and over again, is that it just does the same kind of banal shit over and over again. Like, hey, here's a recipe for 4th of July.
Right.
Great, thanks. I don't, my kids' chart jumps up, my graph goes 460, 350, 82.
Right.
I don't, your low carb, you know, hot dog bun recipe is not going to save my life here. I have bigger problems. And all of those other places, no matter how friendly they try to make them look, are businesses. And they are not going to go out on a limb and tell you how to pre-bolus. They just won't. And it's despicable that some doctors won't even do it because they don't want you to get low and come back and say, look what you did to me.
Right.
They would rather you drop dead 15 years before you're supposed to and have nobody to sue. And you know, I gave them competent care is what they would think when it was over. And not everyone's like that, but if there wasn't a lot of people like that, then this podcast would have no need and nobody be listening to it. So,
well, and I think that's kind of, you can't really sugarcoat things, right? Because people eventually see that. And you have to give it like it is. This is the information. This is how to do it. If you choose to go forward and use it, great. And if you don't, well, then at least you heard it somewhere, right? I mean, it's kind of like eons ago. I mean, my nephew, who is now 21, he was diagnosed when he was 7. Mm-hmm. And at that point, when he was diagnosed, his doctors kept telling his parents, it's okay if his blood sugar is, 250. He's little, and that's okay for right now. We're just worried about him being too low. And whenever my husband and I, we didn't have kids at that point, but whenever we'd go and visit them, I'd be like, it is not okay for his blood sugar to be 250. Right. I mean, that was like eons ago, right? It's like 15 whatever years ago, not quite, but, so bringing this up now is really important because there are a lot of little kids and teens being diagnosed. Mm-hmm. And for them to know from the beginning that despite their services being much more conservative and that quote unquote, like, let's make sure that you're safe. And by no means am I saying don't be safe,
right.
But down the road, like you said, 15 years from now, their little blood vessels and things are not going to be safe because you were more comfortable with a blood sugar of 200.
Yeah. So the evil person that lives inside of me that, I got rid of a long time ago, who could have become an attorney and become really rich doing it. That person doesn't get, the worst thing that I can imagine, Jenny, is wasted time. Like I have real trouble with that. I do not like to waste time. I don't like to have conversations that aren't valuable. I don't like to have friends that I hate wasting time. It feels like the ultimate sin. And if I was the type of person who could put out a podcast about nothing and draw you into it when you could be out there using that time legitimately learning how to make yourself healthier, I couldn't live with myself and do something like that. I think that there are too many people who have talked themselves into believing there's no real help for these people with diabetes. So I'll just serve them this bland content and I'll get them excited every year about a cure coming, and then I'll string them along with some recipes for something, and then once in a while I'll let somebody tell a story about how scary it was to have diabetes, and that'll keep them locked in with fear. I mean, I want you people to listen, which is why I do the interviews with other people. I think good stuff comes out of the interviews, but I think also that too many of you listening don't know another person with type 1 diabetes. So you get to listen to people who have type 1. I try to make it entertaining so that it's not just like the same thing over and over.
Where they could essentially be watching like a presentation on a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And there's
you don't want that.
There's no personality.
I talked to April Blackwell a couple days ago and I put it right up. And I think we talked about diabetes for 8 seconds. And then she flies the International Space Station. So I'm like, this is what we need to be talking about, you know? And she has type 1 diabetes. Same thing with when Alyssa Weilerstein was on. She's a world-class cello player. Like, ask her about how she pre-boluses. You know what I mean? Like no. Like let's have great conversations. So those conversations to me are really interesting and help you meet people who have type 1 diabetes who do interesting things. Because if I just came on every time and I was like, all right, feet on the floor, this is what it is, you know, you'd be out of here and it wouldn't help you then. And I have to, part of my job is to trick you into doing better with your diabetes. Like it really is. Like I said something online the other day, somebody asked a question and I was like, Jenny said that. I can't remember where. And there's this part of me that's like, wait a minute, are you not listening to every episode? I'm doing this very specifically for you, like, you know, but I understand everyone can't listen to every minute, or that maybe I don't do a good job sometimes or whatever, or, you know, but the idea is that I honestly believe if you went back, I don't know, I haven't heard episode 1 since I recorded it. I don't know what's in it, but what I could tell you is if you went back, found a way to listen to 420 episodes of this podcast, when you got to the end, you'd be incredibly good at taking care of your diabetes. And you may have heard 50 hours of conversation that later you could write off and say it had nothing to do with it. But I don't know how to point you to the exact episodes you need to hear. Like, I don't know which episode Jenny said, when you fall asleep, your digestion slows down. Like, I don't know which one that is. And, you know, either. Jenny, does this happen to you? I'll get a note from somebody and they're like, oh my God, what you said worked. And I'm like, who are you? I don't know. Like I don't.
Right. And what was it that I said that worked?
Let me jot it down.
What did you apply?
Right. Exactly. Like, tell me that. And then I have to I dig backwards and I'm like, oh, this is a person. They have a kid. And I read it. And then I realized that we had enough meaningful back and forth. I get that she thinks I know who she is, except I've had them back and forth like that with 100 more people since then.
Right.
And I don't know who you are anymore. I'm like, it's the worst thing to send somebody emote and go, I'm so sorry to ask this. Who are you?
What was your name again?
Yeah, I don't have time to go look. And, but that's good. Like, that's good because the more people who learn how to handle themselves well, the more they'll tell somebody else, which will lead to other people having healthy results. And I'm telling you, like, it's a long shot for me, but I want for this podcast to fundamentally change how doctors talk to people with type 1 diabetes. Like, I want to, whatever my last day is, like, I want one of my last thoughts to be, no one's going to cry in the shower. And I helped, you know?
Right.
That's what I'm shooting for.
Well, I think what helps too is kind of what you were elaborating on with discussion, just mentioning those 2 other women, where you might have spent like a minute talking to them in the whole discussion about their diabetes, but that is a piece that's missing in diabetes education. It's not really the right word for it, because what you're bringing in is a piece of real life. Yeah. The fact that you could be this person. You could do this. You could do that. And our whole conversation for 45 minutes was not about diabetes. It was about what an awesome cello player you are and where you've been and what you've seen and what you've been able to do. Yes, you have diabetes, but you still live. Yeah. And those are grabbing points for a lot of people, I think, and a big reason many people would continue and do continue to listen. I mean, that's a grabbing point for me in terms of listening. I mean, I don't really go to the episodes that are about education. The other ones they're awesome. And I listen too, because they're people. And one of my favorite things that I ever did in my life with diabetes is I attended a diabetes training camp for adults with type 1 who wanted to be better athletes. And while the whole week was all about diabetes management, the in-between with all of the other people I was at camp with was life. Yeah. And that's kind of what your podcasts bring. It's life, and it's also, I want to learn a little bit more of this. Let me click on this one versus I just want to learn about the cello player. Yeah.
No, I think it's incredibly important. And I didn't realize, so I'm a boy. So when something happens in front of me, I just think like, we'll blow it up, kill it, or don't worry, it's not a problem. Like, do you know what I mean? Like I genuinely don't think women understand how men think any more than men understand how women think, right? But there's nothing you could say to me that I don't think I could do. Like, I'm sitting here right now, I'm almost 50 years old. I'm completely out of shape. And if you brought a 25-year-old guy in here and said, can you kick his ass? I'd be like, God damn right I can. And by the way, I can't. Okay. Like, but it makes, I don't ever have that thought. And so when Arden got diabetes, I was just like, well, I'll just do it. Like, I'll figure it out and I'll do it. So to hear that somebody might not think that they could be an athlete because they have type 1, that doesn't resonate with me at all. I would never think of that. Even when people are saying, like, I'll get notes sometimes that are like, how do I keep my kids, blood sugar from falling during like an activity? And I was like, well, you get your settings so right that there's no active insulin while you're running around and it won't fall. But that's not really an answer to that question, is it? So, and the answer to that question is so much bigger, and why it works in audio and doesn't work as well in writing, and also doesn't work as well in audio if you're not good at talking about it. Right. It's just, there's a lot there that has to coalesce to make it. I can tell you don't have active insulin while you're being active, and that, but people don't. It's just diabetes moves too quickly. Right. It's just one meal rolls into the next meal, rolls into the next meal. It's almost like they don't recognize that 3 times a day they're doing something that's going to screw up 6 hours from now. Right. And so they get caught in this wheel of doing something, getting fooled into thinking it's okay for a couple of hours, and then having it go wrong. And the insulin that they worked with happened so far in the past, they don't recognize that's what's going on. So they never see the real problem. They're always they're swinging at ghosts all the time. Right. I think that's a lot of the reason, though, that our conversations together that are about specific like diabetes, like topics, right, they're conversational in nature. And that helps people to think further than, like you said, a written kind of paragraph about something is just that. There's nobody to converse about with it. It is, you read it, and you kind of try to apply it. It's sort of like going to a doctor who takes the clinical cut and dry, well, you should adjust it this way because this is what's happening. Yeah. But there's no like back and forth, which is kind of what we have, which is fun. Well, I recorded with Kenny the other day to add another loop episode. And
I haven't listened to it yet. I came into my email and I was all excited.
Well, he gives this great explanation about putting in a bolus, but changing the time to the future, and then when the loop says, okay, we're going to put in 3 units now, saying no. And so that, right. And so he gives this great explanation, but in my mind, I'm like, I don't know if that's clear to people listening. And so I said, so you're telling me that basically what I'm doing is giving Loop some pocket money, some walking around money that it can spend wherever it wants. And he goes, yes. And I went, okay, great. And we kept moving. 5 5 notes I've received so far in the last 2 days, that changed my whole understanding of something. And I didn't know I was going to say that. It's just how it occurred to me in the moment, you know? So if the weird way that my brain works somehow is helping people, that's cool. But I can't even take that much credit for it. Like, basically what happened was I understood what he said, but I could not re-articulate it in a technical way. If you asked me to say what he just said in my own words, I would have been lost. You
said it like a guy walking down the street who has no knowledge about it. You're like, this is like this instead. Yeah, it's not just the medical terms.
So what you're saying is this, and that's my whole approach to diabetes. I'm at this point, I'm sure you feel the same way, but anyone could walk into this room right now and I could set them right in a couple of hours. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't be that hard. And
give them tools to move forward with as well.
That would take another day. Yeah.
It takes a bit, but right now you could say, this is definitely a big part of the problem. Let's do this. And then we'll work on the rest as we see that this works.
And so we're going to keep doing that. We're going to, you're going to keep coming back. Hey. Jenny's going to record all through 2021 and 2022. We're going to talk about all kinds of stuff. I would imagine there's going to be more conversations about algorithm pumping because that is kind of the future. And I want to get people into that way of thinking. It'll be
interesting to have a conversation once Omnipod's system comes
out. It will be. And so that'll be good. And then we're going to get people in to talk about, we're going to talk about Control IQ. We're going to talk about Omnipod 5. I'll talk about that Medtronic one when it comes out if we need to. And I'm just kidding. I would be happy to do that. But the podcast is going to keep moving forward. I have no plans on slowing down. And I want to thank everybody listening. 2020 downloads. And I know some people are like, I stream it. Does that count? However you listen counts. But from 2017 till 2020, we have doubled our monthly downloads every year. So 2018 was doubled over 17, 19 was doubled over 18, 20 was doubled over 19. And if 2021 doubles over this, it's going to be easier for me to get other guests because it's going to stick us into a stratosphere where people are actually going to be like, yes, I'll come on because they know that'll do something for them. So we're kind of making the podcast into a commodity, which then will allow us to do a little better. Right now, I still have to fight to get some people on the show a little bit, you know, so it's interesting how much the downloads mean behind the scenes.
So maybe you'll have to ask only once versus 3 times.
Yeah, I won't have to work so hard to get them. So Jenny, I hope you have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I want to cut this off now because I want to tell you something privately that these people can't hear. Sorry, guys. That's it for 2020. 131 episodes, 1 pandemic, and a lot of A1Cs going down and getting stable. Thanks so much for listening to the Juicebox Podcast. I'll be back in just a few days with the beginning of Season 7. I have a great story about someone who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes as an adult, just as they were finding out they were pregnant. It's one of my favorite stories from the last couple of years. And I finally got to record with the person that it happened to. I'd like to wish everyone a happy and healthy new year. I'd like to give you a lot of credit for making it through that last year. And I think we can all agree that if 2021 can just be a little less of a fucking disaster, that would be amazing.